learning online in a busy home and a session for student parents. So I've put together some slides to share some insights and a little bit of research on what I think is most helpful to student parents who are studying at home this summer. So I often work with student parents because I'm an instructor of online courses, and students who are parents often take online courses because it's a way of balancing childcare responsibilities with their educational goals. So even before the summer of 2020, when everything moved online, I was often working with students who were working a lot from home and studying from home, even when campus was opened. So the obvious concept that I usually talk to students about first is, of course, the time management piece. When you're a parent and you have family responsibilities and you're doing coursework, it's always a discussion around time management. And as a parent, I find that it tends to depend on the age of our child, how we're doing our study time. And some parents will put that time in to study in the early AM, or it might be in the afternoon during toddler nap time, or it might be in the evening, or even late night sessions where people who have family responsibilities are having to put their study time late night, midnight and so on, when family members are sleeping and family responsibilities have calmed down. As an instructor, when I talk with students who are parents, I often try to identify what the specific challenges are for that parent at that particular term, because as we know, family life is dynamic. So when our children are very young or when we have a newborn, the demands on us are very different from when we have teenagers. And so as a group, you're very different from one another depending on age of the child and how many responsibilities you have with, kids of different ages, right? I want to reiterate that learning how to manage your time and your tasks definitely improves with each term. So when I talk to seasoned university students who've been at this for a while, they definitely have figured out some of the ways in which they can manage the tasks associated with university life. And after the recorded part of this presentation, I'm really curious to hear from you guys about what you've learned this summer already about task management. And for myself, teaching in the social sciences, when I talk about learning activities, it's really about time for reading, studying what you've been assigned to read, and then writing time. And other courses have other responsibilities, like other activities as well, but for my courses, it's often reading and writing time. And for a lot of university courses, it's all about when you're going to schedule time to read and when you're going to schedule time to write. So because I've been at this for a while, I often give presentations, and I do commit to not giving advice that I wouldn't take myself or that I haven't tried myself. So in terms of study strategies, because I've been a parent who's worked from home for a long time, the strategies that I've used in my own life, I often share with students. So for example, depending on the age of your kids and the material you're learning, one thing I definitely have done is gotten my kids involved, or gotten my son involved. And I say kids because I'm thinking about you guys and getting the kids involved. And I will have my son, learn what I'm studying for a final exam and help me make flashcards, and to kind of get the kids in your household involved, if that's age appropriate, with the content you're learning, to also to role model for them, good study strategies, which of course as a family is something that we like to do. After the recorded session, we'll talk about stress and kind of the way that we frame some of the stressors that we face as parents and as learners and working in the university environment, because the university was not really set up for students who are parents, right? Traditionally, the university is set up for people who can devote full-time to their studies. And we all know that that's not realistic for a lot of people. They're working and parenting and they're a student. So we'll talk about stress a little bit more after the recorded part. Okay. So I put some of our session topics into thought bubbles here, and I'm very much a visual learner, visual thinker. And so I wanted to visualize kind of the multiple factors that are related to online learning and learning in a busy home. So these thought bubbles are simply topics that I hope generate some discussion for us. And we're going to hopefully talk about how we get motivated to keep going in our studies when we don't feel motivated, how we help ourselves to advocate for ourselves, and reaching out to access information and supports that we need at different times in the term. I definitely want to have students share any of the experiences you want to share, and to look at how we can play to our strengths as learners and as parents, because to parent children takes a lot of strategizing and a lot of planning ahead, and those strategies often, of course, help with your job as a student as well. So the reason why we're not recording the full hour and a half that we have this block of time together is so that students can just freely share and we can share ideas. All right, so on this slide, I wanted to share a family resource management approach. And this comes from a textbook that I use in family social sciences. And I personally have come around to realizing how insightful this approach is to help me see that these bigger issues and stressors that we can face in life can be broken down and understood through a process. And I really like this particular process, which is why I'm sharing it with you. And it's basically like a 6-step process of working through a problem or a goal. So after the recorded part of the session, we'll look at some of the specific issues and stressors, goals that you have as a student parent. The one that I'm thinking of right now that is coming up for people because we're moving towards the end of term is that we have the goal of working on our final exams and final papers in the course. And so working through this model, we would look at how our values are tied to our motivation to keep going with our courses, how we can re-motivate ourselves at the end of term to keep going. And I know that for student parents, there's a lot of pressure to finish university as soon as possible. And it's important to clarify the values you have around getting the full educational experience and not feeling rushed to go through the experience as quickly as possible. So clarifying values in this model just refers to that bigger picture of what are the values you have for your bigger goals in life and how your education fits into that. And then going much more into a practical level, identifying the resources that you've got during exam week in specific. So for my example of where we're at in term, you're looking ahead to finishing your finals, finishing your papers. Student parents may have different levels of resources depending on how close you live to family members who can help with childcare, or identifying any sorts of resources you have, access to in terms of other people for support, or skills that you have that you can bring as a human resource that you bring to your study sessions that you're going to capitalize on. And then the fourth step in this process, I really want to emphasize, as an instructor, we want students to plan ahead. And student parents are really good at this often because they do have to plan around family schedules. So student parents are often the students who will email me far in advance to talk about upcoming tests and exams and to make plans to meet with me. And that's really key. And I'll emphasize that a few times, that as an instructor, especially during online course teaching time, which is now going to be for at least the fall, we are going to need students to contact us in advance to make plans to meet with us. And that can really help to alleviate some of your stress to have that kind of planning. And implementing your plan is basically following through and making sure that you're able to meet deadlines. And then the feedback piece, and the textbook that I took this from talks about how we often forget to think back and evaluate how we did and to remember the successful strategies we used to get through the previous courses. Because when we're stressed, we might forget some of the things we've done in the past to actually deal with the stress we had last year at this time, for example. And so I like this process because it's a 6-step process that reminds us that we can work through our particular stressors like exam time or prepping for fall and planning courses. And we can identify the different steps that we're going to walk through and kind of talk with ourselves about, if not talk with our family members about. Okay, so studying with limited daycare. So due to COVID-19 closures, many parents who had children in schools and daycares had to quickly adjust to the closures of our schools and daycares back in March of 2020. So then what does this mean for student parents? It has meant studying without a campus and also without the daycare resources that we all relied on, and the school, of course, schedule for children. So it becomes about creating these effective learning sessions in our own homes. And after the recorded portion, I definitely want to ask people how this is going, because we're all kind of learning this as we go this summer. But on this slide, I've written out some of the important perspectives that I use to support students who are parents and to support the success for these for students during term. I'll go back to that distinguishing as an instructor. I distinguish your learning tasks between reading time and writing time. And what I end up talking to parents about is the fact that although it's ideal to have long periods of time to devote to your study, the reality is that you've got small bits of time. So instead of the 2 hours that you would love to have just to focus on your studies, in reality, you probably have 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 20 minutes there in the course of a day to put together some studying tasks. And the next slide is actually going to talk about how that actually is not necessarily a bad thing to have these short study sessions, because we can effectively use these small bits of time that we have for really focused study sessions. For me and for students in my courses, that means breaking up a large task, like writing a paper, into much smaller objectives, and then parsing those out over the period of the day or the week. And also, as it says on the slide here, identifying your peak times. So the periods during the day when you feel the most efficient, when you accomplish your best work. And this comes from a book called Success Secrets of University Students. That is an entire book devoted to talking to students about success at the university, not just for student parents, but for everyone. But for student parents, obviously, identifying your peak times is going to make it more effective or efficient and effective for you to tackle some of the study tasks that you have when you get to the nitty-gritty dirt work of finishing up a degree, because there's a lot of reading, just a mountain of reading in a lot of courses like mine, and quite a bit of writing in a lot of your courses. And you're going to do a lot of that work in small, focused sessions. And when I say small sessions, what I would do in the classroom with students is we would have 10 minutes and we would look at one section of one chapter in the textbook. We would just focus on highlighting the important concepts on that one page. And in 10 minutes of focused studying, we would actually get quite a bit of knowledge and information from our materials, because we could identify a really specific goal. Like, we're just going to read this one page, we're just going to make notes on this one diagram. So the next slide talks about multitasking. And the information on this slide is based on a fabulous video that I encourage you all to check out. It's a pretty short video called Stop Multitasking Now. So it talks about how people are often proud of their ability to multitask. And when we define multitasking, what psychologists or people who study the brain are often talking about is the brain's ability to shift attention and processing from one task to another, back and forth, back and forth. And this this sociology professor from Stanford, Clifford Nass, has studied multitasking and has looked at what happens to us when we're multitasking and what happens to our focus and our attention. Because I think as student parents, we try to fit in multitasking sessions if we can. So multitasking does work with an activity that doesn't require our full attention. And the example that I'll give here is when you're driving and listening to music. So you're driving in an area that you're familiar with, and you're listening to music, and then all of a sudden you turn into a parking lot where you've got to find a parking spot. You realize the parking lot is kind of full and there's other traffic. So a lot of us, what would we do instinctively? We turn down the music we were listening to. And we do this because we know we want to focus on something that we need to focus more of our brain power on, which is finding a parking spot. And paying attention to the music is taking some of our processing away. So we don't want our brain to go back and forth from listening to the song to finding a parking spot. Okay, so how does this relate to being a student parent? Well, when we're studying at home and we've got little children around or just other family members, we will sometimes do things like listen to a video that our prof has assigned and fold laundry. And that's possible, right? Because you can do those things and you're mindlessly folding the laundry. But once you move into more important tasks cognitively, where you need to have considerable attention on the one task, like you're taking notes on a chapter in a textbook, then multitasking doesn't really work very well. So I often will talk to student parents about how to carve out small amounts of time where they can just focus on their textbook without having a television on or children interrupting them. Because the takeaway is actually that the multitasking research shows that it's better for us to set aside smaller bits of time to focus on a study task than to try to multitask and shift our attention back and forth. So I often will talk to students about the difference between trying to read your textbook in the same room that someone is watching a TV show for half an hour versus setting aside 10 minutes, patiently asking family members to give you 10 minutes alone to read, and then watching the other 20 minutes of the TV show with them. Because our brains work best when we are focused on the one task, when that task is what's called like cognitively involved, where we want to take notes, we want to focus as much of our attention as possible on our work. And as a parent, I know that getting interrupted is a part of family life. Like even when I was making this presentation, I had family members kind of just asking like, where is such and such? And is there any milk left? And what happens when we're focused on a task and we get interrupted like that, and it's, innocently done in a home where people are asking questions, it takes a while for our brain to redirect to the amount of focus we had before the interruption. So if you watch the video, you'll see him talk about that it can take up to 10 minutes even for us to refocus on what we're doing after we're interrupted. So having those smaller uninterrupted times, the research shows that that's going to be more effective for our learning. And I found that myself, so I like to share that. I want to finish the presentation by reinforcing the fact that you're a student in a community and you shouldn't feel like you have to address problems all alone. So you should know that there are lots of people in different roles that can provide information and support that you're looking for. And as an instructor at the U of M, I just wanted to emphasize this. This is information that other people will also emphasize for you as a student. But this list is actually the list of resources that I will direct students to and will help students to access throughout the term. The first line of communication about a course-related matter, of course, is the instructor and your professors. And then you also have other people who can answer questions for you. The student advisors in your home faculty, they're still available to you, even though we're all online. The Academic Learning Center, the Student Accessibility Services, the English Language Center, the Student Counseling Center, Bald Eagle Lodge, Migizi-Agamic, and the Office of Student Advocacy. And so hopefully you already know that there are many offices at the U of M that you can connect with and find information about and connect with so that you don't feel alone in the wilderness to do your degree now that you're at home and not on campus. And on the next slide, I want to talk about how important it is to self-advocate as a student parent, because your instructors aren't going to have that face-to-face time with you during your online and remote learning. And I'll talk about my experience as an instructor with students and self-advocacy. So how do you advocate for yourself as a student when you need information and support? So as an instructor, I will get emails from students, and I have some students every term who are very confident at advocating for themselves. They ask for clarification, they ask for advice, they ask for information, they ask for support. And I know that there are other students in the background who aren't as confident contacting me and emailing me with those same questions or concerns. And I don't hear from them. And that's, concerning, because as instructors, we want to know how students are doing with their coursework. So part of why I wanted to do this presentation was to impart on you this, the importance of feeling confident, advocating for what you need, whether you need information or you need some support, and to ask your instructors for that kind of support. So in the classroom setting, uh, an instructor like myself will ask, is there any questions? Are there any questions? And those brave students who will ask a question in a big classroom of 50 people or even 100 people or more are asking a question that their classmates also are thinking about but are very shy about asking about. So it's always great when students ask questions in the classroom, because like 5 or 10% of the classmates probably have that same question. And now that we're online, you don't have that same experience as a student, because you don't have that classroom experience where someone else will ask the questions that you had. So I really want you to advocate for yourself. We're using email as our main tool. Some instructors will have Zoom sessions, some instructors will use discussion areas in Learn. But the communication between you and your instructor um, will need to flow so that you can clarify what their expectations are, and also ask for that info and support. So always draft your email and edit it before sending. Don't feel pressured to share lots of detailed personal information unless you want to share this with your instructor. And if you're not sure how much of your family situation you want to share with your instructor, you can always contact your student advisor or student advocacy and or student accessibility services even, because they are in a role where they talk with students a lot about what situations come up for people when they're students at the U of M. And so they will have some familiarity with how you might not want to share this particular detail, and they'll help you to figure out how to communicate with your instructor effectively about that. Ask your instructor what the options are for addressing your question and concern, and give them information that helps them to support you. So when I get emails from students and we problem solve together, it's always helpful to know what the timeline is for the stressor that you're dealing with. So if something has come up in your family, it's helpful to know a little bit about whether this is going to be something that is a stressor for the next week or maybe even longer. And you can clarify for your instructor what the specific resources are that you're looking for. And also you can identify what specific elements of the course or the assignment that you're finding problems with or feeling stressed about. So the instructor has that kind of detailed information about what in particular is stressing you out, so they can zone in on that. Okay, so the takeaways from this session are listed on this slide. The first takeaway is just to highlight the resource management approach and to have some framework for identifying the different steps we have to take to have a strategy for managing our time, managing the resources that we have in our lives. For student parents, that's extremely important because we have different resources at different times. And the second bullet point on this slide, it reminds you to review successes during your learning experience. And that's something we forget to do if we're busy. We forget that we've already successfully managed a lot of these stressors or these types of stressors before. And it builds confidence in our future problem solving when we remind ourselves of that. The second point is just on the research on multitasking. The third point is about self-advocacy, and the fourth point is to identify your strengths as a parent and how they can apply to your tasks as a student. So I want to thank you very much for listening to this presentation and watching this presentation, and we're going to shift now to the next part of our session together.